Hello and welcome to this week of the Based on Balls podcast. I am Hen, joined alongside Connor for this week's episode back after, I think, a couple of weeks gone. Connor always locking down, always just wrapped up week 13 of the Johnny Lee Memorial League. 1 week away until the All-Star break. Connor, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I had a very grindy game last week, but got a win. And in week 13, I'm already above what my 2023 win total was. So the spirits are up both in the league and just given that we are coming off the 4th of July holiday.
Yeah, scrappy win for yourself. Like you said, got off the 4th of July holiday. Kind of a low-key holiday for me. Obviously, lots going on, but kind of kept it chill, and I was fine with that as well. But let's talk about this league because a lot went on in this week. A lot of really tightly contested matchups going down to the wire. I think we got to start with what was match of the league, and actually it's week 14, not week 13. I apologize, but a lot of interesting matchups this week. I think there are two really big ones that stand out. I'm going to start first with the Norfolk Tides taking down the Bowling Green Hot Rods 755 to 4. Paul coming off a tough loss to me where both teams scored well into the 700s. Cody had just taken down John Heights, but Paul really cementing himself with this big win here. Connor, what did you see in this matchup?
Yeah, so for context, the last couple weeks on the podcast, we kind of talked about the state of the league, and there weren't too many big shakeups. I think the two matchups that impacted the league the most were Paul beating Cody and the Jab Bry matchup we are going to get to later. For Paul, this is a signature win. I think at the beginning of the year, the consistent view was he was in the 5 to 7 team range. He was fighting for one of the last playoff seeds last year, and he may not have been in the same category as a Cody, a Height, a Jab, or a Bry. Now he has 2 wins against those teams, and this matchup did come down to Sunday, but it's 80 points at the end. So I think 755 is a very competitive score, and it's pretty. Paul did it relatively consistently, 307 pitching points and some very well spread out bats. 448 is going to get it done against most teams. For Cody, 674 is definitely a down week, but I'm curious to see where he goes here since we are now 3 or 4 weeks away from the trade deadline. Luis Robert with 54 certainly stands out. Freddie Freeman with 53, keeping the consistency, and then not too many awful pitching performances, just didn't do enough to catch up to the Tides.
Yeah, I mean, the pitching points broke down 307, 306 in favor of Paul. So basically evenly matched. It's just that Paul outscored Cody's bats by over 80. A couple things you mentioned talking about the trade deadline coming up soon. Cody lost 2 arms this week to IL. Tyler Glasnow on the 15-day IL due to back tightness. He had been a rock for Cody coming to SP5. And then Jared Jones, who started off really hot, was catching fire early in the season, has been up or down, but still, just a nice back-end arm or, a depth arm, especially if you're a championship contender like him. So I'm wondering how he's going to do some maneuvering, especially, we don't know what the uncertainty of either of those guys are. We know Glasnow's definitely had his injury, and they're calling a right lat strain for Jared Jones. Expected return is around August. So, we'll see where that puts him. In terms of Paul, like you said, the patches came to play, almost 450. Brian Reynolds really has just been on another level individually. 61 points in the week, just been an absolute monster. It's definitely a trade I regret making. I feel like I sold a little bit low on him, but just a lot of just solid performances all around, a lot of 40-point performances from him. And for Cody, team didn't do bad. 674 is, not terrible. And obviously you want to hit that 700 mark, but some things just didn't shake his way. Definitely will look to bounce back next week. And then Paul, definitely a huge win to stay afloat, especially after last week. The Tides, I mean, huge bounce back win for them. Heading on to our next matchup, I'd say the co-contender for matchup of the week. People were saying, uh, Bry's Rocky Mountain Vibes with the late comeback against the Portland Sea Dogs Jabs team, winning 798 to 766. This was a game decided by about 30 points, and it was a 60-point advantage towards Bry in Sunday night alone. Picked up 146 to secure the win. I know we were all kind of intently looking at it. One of the games I'd say in this season, I mean, that really came down to a Sunday night baseball showdown. I feel like we haven't had too many of them this season, but definitely got one of them here. Rafael Devers leading the way for Bry's team with 80 excellent performances on the pitching department, 393 round. Craig Kimbrell, 63-point week as a closer. Tarek Skubal with 2 quality starts, a huge Sunday night start as well. And Jake Irvin just adding on to his prolific season. And looking at Jab, I mean, he almost had 500 points with his bats and loss, just kind of brutal. 70-point weeks from Jordan and Bobby Witt. Will Smith also added that, but the arms just weren't enough. 276. You know, it's not going to cut against the elite, especially when you're getting outscored by over 100. Still some solid performance all around, but just not enough to beat Jab, or not enough to beat Bry, excuse me.
Yep. And to piggyback off that, it's kind of weird because with Jab's roster construction, he only has 1 or 2 bench bats. He has more relievers on his team than I think anyone else in the league, but it looks like Bry used 4 more pitchers. He's incredibly adept at figuring out who is likely to get him points. And I don't think there were too many bombs in this, but 276 is just one slightly disappointing start after another for the Sea Dogs. At the end of the day, I still think these are like the 2 and 3 seed in as we get into the playoffs, but I do think this matchup was telling that going into the deadline, does Jab try to acquire more pitching, or does the balance change where he tries to move a couple big assets and get some waiver spots? Because Bry is going to use his roster spots the most, and I think Jab only had like 1 or 2 waiver claims the entire period. So different managerial styles, different team setups, but they both did terrific.
No, yeah, I mean, and you mentioned, and we'll talk a little bit about it as we get to the trade section. Jab's talking about making his own imprint on this team. He's the only new owner coming into this year. So obviously still trying to, you know, has a very competitive roster and very elite roster. He's mostly kept intact. But with this game, there's now a 3-way tie for second place at 11-3. John Height currently sits atop of I think it's the Grady Sizemore division, or it's the Ian Kinsler division, excuse me. At 11-3, picking up now the second seed, and brought or Jab with a golden opportunity to potentially tie for first place, could not get it. So still a 1-game lead for that coveted first place spot, and 4 teams still all in the running for it. And we'll definitely see how Jab kind of approaches a roster, especially like you said. You know, he seems to be the one maybe most likely to do some tinkering just because on previous stuff we have heard. But we're going to move on to the next game. I'm going to go towards – I'll touch on your game, Connor. Like you said, a real grind fest as the Amarillo Sod Poodles won 462 to 414. Now, I'm going to actually kind of do this unconventionally because, I mean, obviously, you know, the high-scoring matchup for either team. But, Connor, you alluded to it. Your team broke through the, you know, win threshold of last season. And I kind of want to just get your thoughts on kind of the development you've had of the team, because we know the team you took over was probably the worst position it could be, and one of the worst rosters you could take in, maybe the worst roster you can take in. And obviously been, very meticulous of who you're trading for, who you're getting, who you're selling. And while you're still on the outside looking in terms of playoff mention, obviously huge strides are made. You exceed your win total last year, a couple. So you'll be maybe feeling on yourself. Obviously, big win for you against Scott. But what is thoughts seen the development of your roster in this past year from a team that was basically for any of basically a guaranteed team to rounding up, obviously still a lot to build upon, but obviously some huge things for you.
Yeah. So for full disclosure, 2023 was my first year in Dynasty Baseball, and I think the Giant League Memorial League was my second league join.
Period, or in this league?
Is the Giant League Memorial League is the
baseball period, or just this league?
League I ever joined. So the Giant League Memorial League is one of the, last year was the first year I had done Dynasty Baseball. So a lot of what I was aware that the roster I took over would not compete, but during the year I did a lot of experimentation. I knew that I didn't want to just flat sell everything and then sit around for 10 weeks, but I made mistakes. I learned whatever. This year, I think I've refined the formula a little bit more to figure out at the beginning of the year. I think I did a good job of figuring out which pitchers that were not heralded would make rotations and have the opportunity to be flipped for a couple assets down the road, and be a little bit more patient in buying. So over time, I think my pitching's definitely been a work in process, but the hitting is now solidified. And I think the main goal for the next few weeks and going into the off season is how do I use my wide asset accumulation to get more pitching and get up to where the next tier is.
No, definitely a lot of strides have been made. Obviously, you mentioned your kind of first year in the Giant League Memorial League. As with a lot of people, I mean, I think there was like 7 or 8 owners who came in last year, really kind of started anew. And like you said, the big challenge is the pitching. That seems like for a lot of these teams, that's what the big issue is. Obviously, it's easier said than done. You kind of have to hope that you buy low on a candidate, buy low on a guy and becomes an ace, or you just end up rostering someone and he, a prospect, and he develops into one as well. But obviously, that's a big challenge. But obviously, huge strides for your team. I mentioned a couple before. The parity of the league in general has just been a lot better this past year. I mean, I mentioned it in the main chat that the biggest win streak, biggest active win streak right now is 2 wins. So kind of just showing you the competitive balance of everything in there. I mean, almost, obviously there's still a big team race for first place. There's still a fight for the bottom of the playoffs. Basically every team's still in it with the exception of Bracton. So, obviously Connor's just part of that equation. Definitely did a good job retooling, and we'll see where he develops from there. But I'll quickly touch on my game against myself, the Clearwater Beach Dogs, taking down the Rocket City Trash Pandas 761 to 648. I think this big story of this matchup had to be the pitching. Had 440 points with the arms in 273. Absolutely just dominant performance all around from my arms. 8 quality starts out of 12. Really got to be happy with that. Got a positive pitching performance from everyone. If you get that, I feel like that's a big recipe for success. Justin Steele with a complete game, huge for him. Chris Sale with a dominant 41-point performance. Grayson Rodriguez turning out 2 quality starts for 74. Just overall dominance all around. The bats weren't even really the only 320, although Brent Rooker had himself a week 79, but still got less than Homko. So maybe there is a bit of caution, but I will say I also have players coming back. But for Homko, really came down to the pitching. It's kind of hard to keep it with 440 pitching points. 273 is not even that bad. It just, you know, when you're having a week against my team, it's kind of hard to keep pace. Connor, I don't know if you really need to take away from this matchup. What are your thoughts if you have any?
I don't know if there's too big of a takeaway from the matchup. I think from a league perspective, this isn't the year that your team was hoping for, but I believe you're 2 games back of the major tie for second place, and there are a few weeks left. So I definitely think there is time to turn things around, and I look forward to seeing what your team does the rest of the year.
No, yeah, I think my team has really started to turn it around. Had to do a little tweaking. Was really injured for the most part. I'm hoping to get some guys back, especially who's come off the All Star break. I am actually 2 games behind that tie, and I play Bry actually this week, so could cut that deficit down a game. I don't know if you noticed. Now, I mean, I should have checked before, but before Dave's Rochester Red Wings taking out the El Paso Chihuahuas, if I could speak properly, 748 to 505. Just an absolute onslaught by Dave's team. 522 points from the Bats. Definitely up there for one of the highest totals of the season. Outscored Smell's entire team. Multiple lead performances. Shout out Christian Walker. 93 points in 7 games is ridiculous. I remember, me personally, I was like, I kept tabs on him like a couple weeks ago. I was like, maybe I'd get him for like kind of cheap. That's probably out of the equation now. He's been on another tear. I assume Dave might want to keep him, honestly, but just an absolute down performance. The arms, 226, not great, but when you're dropping over 500 points with your bats, I think that's perfectly fine. And then for Smell, kind of just ran into a buzzsaw this week. Really can't say much more than that. But Dave's really, 2 back-to-back impressive weeks in terms of the scoring department. Obviously, it's an uphill battle for him for that 7th seed, but he's got the talent to get it done. I'll tell you that. But so we'll see how that goes. But Connor, what did you see from this game, or specifically from David Schmel's team?
This podcast doesn't have a catchphrase, but if it did, shout out Dave might be one of them, at least for 2024. His team has looked absolutely terrific, and even though he had a couple rough losses, I think the entire league is going to be in fear in 2025. The one thing I'd point out with Dave is that I think he's currently down to 10 prospects, and about half of them I would call bigger names. So I'm curious what the buying trend will continue to be. And for Smell, he wasn't really expecting to try to win here. The biggest development in El Paso is that he now has 13 of the 14 first rounders, the sole holdout being Meone Chad. So both teams did well. Smell gained over 500, so good, and Dave's on a war path, but I think this is pretty expected.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing you mentioned about the prospects, because he does have still some, highly regarded names. K. Cavalli is a notable name. Chase Petty, James Triantos is someone who's been floated around this league a lot. Brennan Davis had some name value a while. So did Hassel and Cross. But when we talk about the bats, the arms. I mean, it's the story for a lot of these teams. We'll see what he does there. He doesn't have a whole lot of chips to work with. I think he still has some to make a move. It's just wondering if teams are really willing to sell there. And Dave seems also interesting because I remember, he's also one of these teams who's kind of, I think, has emerged himself, or really should maybe emerge himself as a buyer. Although, if he loses the next game or two, maybe that changes things. But, and that was the team I remember, earlier on we were talking about teams with a lot of great players from teams to buy off of. Dave's now kind of out of that equation. So it will be interesting to see how he approaches the deadline. He does have some assets to work with, not a whole lot, like you said, but I still think he can pull out, a couple of moves maybe for some, kind of some lesser tier guys who can still produce, just not the big name superstars or the A level talents, because the trade chips maybe aren't 100% there. I'm going to go through these matchups again. I think these next set of matchups, actually, this next matchup, we have two more left. The Hartford Yardgoats taking down the Oklahoma City 89ers 731 to 599. I think, this is kind of just Chad not being all the way there. John Haight's offense pouring out another great performance, 465. Christian Young's with 90. Shohei Ohtani with 65. Really to be expected, although Aaron Judge didn't have a great week, only 25 points. The Yankees have been pretty bad. Chad's team, 3 points with the bats. Pretty good performance, but 216 for arms, not going to cut it. I will say, if you're kind of comparing John Haight to maybe the rest of the top teams, 731 was less than Bry, Jab, myself, and Paul. And he only had 266 points from his arms. Really not good. Nathan Eovaldi was about a third of those points with 79 himself. Outside of him, not many great performances. Luke Weaver with a solid 32 in that, that kind of starter reliever spots. But yeah, I mean, John Haight obviously had a great win. I think this is an expected win, but there is some cause for concern in Hartford, like we mentioned before. The pitching just seems like it hasn't been there, and we don't know if it ever get there this year for John Haight, and that could cost him.
The only thing I think I can add to this matchup specifically is figuring out how Haight might address his weak points. Marcus Semien is getting older, and okay, apparently he's the third-rated second baseman. He's not had the year he's had in previous years from a real-life perspective. Nolan Arenado is not in the top 10 of third baseman. Can those be the starters for a team that is hoping to win a championship? I'm not entirely sure. So I'm curious to see if and how John addresses those positions. And then for Chad, I think the biggest thing, the biggest variable, I should say, in the league right now is who is going to get that 7 seed in the playoffs, Chad versus Tita. Tita had kind of an easier matchup, even though it was a little bit of a struggle. Chad had the worst possible draw, so definitely W Tita this week in terms of that balance. But I believe, Chad did score more than Tita, so I think that is important to keep in mind as we move to the last few weeks of the year and to iron out the bottom of the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, that's as ever a good transition to talk about Tita, who did gain a game on Chad, taking down the Bismarck Larks as my Fantrax is loading. Took him down 570 to 461. I don't think there's really a whole lot to go off of in terms of the individual matchup. Bracken's team, he made an interesting trade, and we'll talk about that. But we know where Bracken team's at. Tita's team, it's always kind of a little bit of shuffling. Shout out Joey Estes with a complete game shutout against the Angels. And Tyler Anderson also again a good outing. 570 is not really where Tita, I assume, wants to be. Just kind of given where the rest of the league is. Like you said, Chad did outscore Tita. Kind of looking at that picture. So the difference between them in points is 52, which is essentially nothing. That's one day in this league. So, the points for battle's close, but Tita did get the win there. I mean, I don't think there's much to talk about in this matchup. We know where Bracken's team at. We know what Tita's dealing with right now. You got anything else, Connor? We can transition to some trade talks.
Transition.
Let's transition to some trades. We're going to talk about. I'd say there's obviously a lot of trades going on. Not a whole lot of big trades. I mean, there were a couple that we will get to. Um, for the most part, it seemed like swapping of some pieces, if I do say so myself. But there are three trades I want to look at. The first trade was on July 3rd. Smell gets Spencer Torkelson, Pete Kerr Armstrong, and Colson Montgomery, and Braxton gets Novelli Marte. I'll kick it over to you first, Connor. What do you think of this trade from both sides?
So Noel V. Marte plays the most premium position out of them and has been a very hot commodity in this league. And given the recent reinstatement from the restricted list or whatever you get put on when there's a PED issue, his stock is very up right now. Spencer Torkelson and Pete Crow Armstrong have had some time in the major leagues, obviously, but have really not been great in 2024. So I think I like this deal for Smell because it is a very clear buy low on some high end assets, and Braxton is kind of buying high on one. But this does fit a more clear need for Braxton. Currently, his future big names have, like, I guess, three key shortstops: Ellie De La Cruz, Anthony Volpe, and Mason Wynn. And there wasn't a clear succession plan at their base, so Marte fits that. So if Braxton's aiming for specific positions, I think this makes sense, but I like the value for Smell more than anything.
Interesting, interesting. I actually like this trade for Braxton, and I get the point on, if you're looking at the guy Smell got a lot of all these guys are really highly touted prospects. I know Spencer Torkelson was number one prospect in baseball at one point. Obviously, he's a couple years removed from that. Pete Kerr Armstrong was in the top three or top five entering into this season. Colson Montgomery's another top 10 guy. Spencer Torkelson, we'll see what's out with him. It seems like his swing's been just off this year. Still down in AAA. So, really, I talked about before on this podcast where Braxton was kind of, not necessarily wasting a roster spot, because I assume there's a lot of people in this predicament in dynasty baseball where you really can't drop them, but you can't send them down either. So he hasn't played a game in the majors since June 1st. We'll see. I assume he'll probably come back up either later this summer or around September. Already at age 24, we'll see what happens, and maybe he can get it all together for 2025. But it seems like 2024 is a lost year for him. Pete Crow Armstrong, I don't know what's up. He mashes the ball in AAA, but he really can't hit in the majors. It's pretty good that he's an amazing defender, so he'll at least keep getting playing time to eventually work on a swing. But in terms of fantasy baseball, right now he's really not providing a lot, and it kind of put Smell in a bad spot because I think Braxton called him up at some point. And then Colson Montgomery, obviously a highly touted prospect. We'll see what that works for him. And then Novelli Marte, I agree this is kind of buying high on a guy because he's buying him right as he's coming back from suspension, not before. And it's not like he's really proven much. He's still kind of working his way back, and it's more of buying Novelli Marte what you think he can be. But I think I like the deal for Braxton because I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the pieces he sent over, maybe with the exception of Colson Montgomery. I like Novelli Marte. I don't know if he'll really, be the Novelli Marte we think he'll be this year because of just coming off an 80 game suspension. But I think overall I actually like this move for Braxton.
So, question to you, Hen. The Cubs are kind of in a weird spot where they absolutely did not think that they would be sellers, but are very much looking like they will be. Do you think that Pete Crow Armstrong moves, or do you think it's likely that another one does and he gets more playing? Because it seems like they have done this weird thing where they will kind of say he's their everyday center fielder and then bench him after 3 or 4 days. And there's just not the consistency needed to develop into a good fantasy asset.
Um, yeah, I definitely think he could get dealt, or not him specifically. Someone on that outfield will probably get dealt. If I had to guess, it's probably Ian Happ. I have to look at what his contract situation is like. But like you said, they have a lot of older outfielders: Ian Happ, Bellinger, Seiya Suzuki. I think the fact that the Cubs are sellers or will be sellers probably will open up the door for him. But this could also just be a situation where, I mean, it can be one, two things. Very slow start to a major league career for Pete Crow Armstrong. He is only 22 years old, and next year will be the year he gets all together. Or he might just be someone who is maybe an average to below average bat, but an elite defender. And so when you're looking at it in terms of regular baseball, that's obviously a big asset, especially in the center field spot. But in terms of fantasy baseball, I don't know if what his like prospect pedigree was. If he has an actual talent, will ever live up to it. He could turn to an amazing hitter next year. And I can be dead wrong, but it just seems like that he's taken this big adjustment to major league pitching. Although that's kind of felt like a young person, young player adjustment across all the minors. So he could just be one example of a larger issue where a lot of these young prospects are really struggling to once they hit the majors and are getting that big adjustment. I know Jordan Walker was a guy who really hasn't been doing that. Hot Jackson Holiday, famously has been, didn't do good in his stint in the majors. So obviously, I think the more playing time will only be good for his development. I just don't know if, as someone who came in as a top 5, 10 prospect, I just don't know if Pete Crow Armstrong, in terms of a fantasy asset, will ever live up to that billing.
Trade number two.
Yes, we will go on to trade number 2. A big blockbuster trade by 2 contenders, as something obviously we get sometimes, but not rarely. But on July 6th, Brian gets Garrett Crochet, Kyle Schwarber. Paul gets Julio Rodriguez, Quinn Matthews. I'll start off with this because I actually, disclaimer, I've been floating the idea of trying to get Julio Rodriguez. He's someone I had my eye on for a bit. Hasn't been doing too great this season, but when you have a 22, 23-year-old bat who, in the past 2 seasons was almost a 6.5, 7-point bat, I feel like, the value's still there. And Bry definitely got value for him. It's interesting because I think on the scale, on the surface, I think long term Paul wins this deal. And obviously, Julio Rodriguez, I think we'll get back to his 2022, 23 form where he's almost a 7-point bat. It's down his career. Maybe this might just be like, I guess it's not a sophomore slump, but a junior year slump for Julio Rodriguez. But in terms of this year, I don't know if the move makes sense. I mean, Julio could have a really torrid second half of the season and kind of eclipse that mark. I always have my cousin who's a longtime fantasy baseball player told me this, and it's something I kind of live by. Unless you're like an elite like player, like I'm talking like top 15, 20. Every baseball player essentially has a good third, a bad third of the season, and then the other third is dependent on how well they do for the season. Julio Rodriguez has had a bad half of the year, but he can turn around with a really good half. Um, in terms of Bry, obviously adding to what is still, in my opinion, or up there with the best set of arms and starting rotation in this league. Garrett Crochet has been an absolute animal. Uh, Over a 26 point per game arm. Probably will get traded to another team because the White Sox are going to be selling, so that will only make him even better. He'll actually start getting some wins, which will only increase his value here. And against Kyle Schwarber, just kind of a nice bat. Nothing too special. He'll either give you like 15 or 20 for a game, or I'll give you 3 just because of how he is as a batter. I do like Quinn Matthews for Paul, a very underrated pitching prospect. Absolutely dominant in through low A and high A this year. A sub of a 2.2 ERA, great K per nine numbers. Really shooting through this Cardinal organization. Could potentially see him, maybe next year for this team. But I think for the long term, I like this for Paul. Short term this season, I think Bry is the winner of this deal.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add on to that. I think Paul's team is doing a interesting dance between trying to go for it all this year and holding on to some chips for 2025 compared to the top 4 teams. And I think I can include Hen's team in here. Paul does have a deeper prospect pool. So I think the question over the next 3 weeks is how much does he move from that to improve now versus waiting and seeing how the playoffs go. But yeah, if Bry is here to win now, getting a top 5 pitcher this year is definitely a move. But Julio Rodriguez is 2 years younger than Garrett Crochet, so if he doesn't win the championship, Bry doesn't win the championship, I could see this backfiring.
Yeah, obviously there's that to play. I mean, even still looking at outfield, still has Stephen Kwan, still has Brennan Doyle. You bring in Kyle Schwarber, still have Heliot Ramos. That's a pretty, good outfield core. And losing, Julio Rodriguez obviously is a big blow, but able to slot in a elite arm who I think will only go to a better situation later down the road. Will only help Bry out for his playoff chances. And the last trade we want to talk about, we know this happened after the window, but we are recording this Tuesday night. So we're using executive power here on the podcast to talk about it. But I think this is probably the best player who's gotten moved this season. I don't think that's too far-fetched to say. I know Acuna got traded in the offseason, but in terms of the regular, this is the best player who's been dealt. And I think we both have a lot of interesting thoughts on this one, Connor. Brackton gets Juan Soto, Nolan Gorman, Emerson Hancock. Jab gets Jackson Churio, James Wood, Spencer Jones, Jackson Jobe, and Marco Gonzalez. Connor, what are your thoughts on this trade?
I mean, in terms of so there's value evaluation and then objective, or what is each GM trying to do. In terms of valuation, I kind of lean Jab here. There are a lot of lottery tickets versus a top 3 player, or top 5 at worst. But Wood is, in my book, the number 1 prospect in baseball. Churio is age 20 and hitting league average, and there are a couple other major pieces that were hyped coming into 2023, but are having down years right now. Coming into 2024, excuse me. So value-wise, maybe I lean Jab, but for both teams, I'm not sure I can give a grade right now because it's just away from everything we'd expect. The contender sold a top 4 or 5 fantasy asset to replenish the farm system, and we're not sure if he's going to move those pieces or keep them. And Braxton, who has said in the main chat that this year is over, is moving away from assets to get a core guy. For Jab, the question is, when does he move them? For Brafton, the question I would have is, what is the timeline? How do you support Dodo, Ellie, Volpe, and how do you do it? There have been some impressive rabbits pulled, but I don't know where he gets the assets to develop the high-end pitching or some of the other like outfield positions that will launch him into the next step in 2025.
I was going. I started my monologue while I was unmuted. But so what I was saying was, in all of my years doing fantasy, not even just fantasy baseball or being in this league, I can't think of another trade where I would say obvious collusion was not in play or collusion was not potentially not in play, where I'm less confused on why both teams made this trade. I agree with you that that you really cannot judge this trade until a year after the fact, maybe. I don't know. I just don't get why both teams made this trade. You have Jab, who has Juan Soto, who, I mean, I know I gave up Juan Soto personally, and, we could talk about, I know that trade's been talked about a lot, but the objective was to get a player who, in theory, was seen as better in Ronald Acuna, who would come off a historic season, a 10-point per game bat. Okay. Move didn't work out, but you understood the process. And so you take Jab's team, who, by all accounts and by what we've seen in the first 14 weeks, is competing for a title. Okay. I just don't know. Maybe I'll say James Wood's the most likely. There's no player coming back in this deal that is going to give you Juan Soto production this year. And if you're a team who's trying to win it all, why would you give up an 8.5 point per game bat who, even though they're struggling right now, is on a good team, plays in a very good offensive park? They'll probably add talent at the deadline, I assume. You would only hope they would if you're a Yankees fan. I just don't get why you take and also he's a player with a lot of years left. He's 25 now, and a player who I will say his game will age gracefully. Okay. I just don't get why you take a guy like Soto when you're trying to win and compete and you give him up for lottery tickets. Like, if he made a deal with someone and maybe got a collection of, high end but not superstar major league players, I would, with a couple of prospects sprinkled in, I would get it. Like, I mean, if you took the deal, I mean, we'll use my deal, for example, for Acuna. I gave up Yordan Alvarez, who's a very good player in his own right, Luis Castillo, and then I gave up Pete Crow Armstrong. So I gave up a high end prospect, but I also gave up, ready now major league players. If you're Jab, you're like, okay, I'll take the downgrade, but I'm getting a great hitter in Yordan. I'm adding an arm who, can fluctuate between the high teens and low 20s. For this, it's like, James Wood's really good. I think he'll be really good. I think like I said, I think he's probably the number one prospect in baseball. He's 6'7" with elite speed, and he's getting better at plate discipline, and he can hit. That's probably a recipe for a great player. Just not this season. I mean, if I had to venture, James Wood's not going to be an 8-point per game bat from this point onward. He'll show flashes, but he just won't have the consistency. Jackson Chourio is not really done too well for Milwaukee, and with them being in the position they're in, they might buy, and he might get lost more in the shuffle. I could happen. Spencer Jones, good prospect. Jackson Jobe, great pitching prospect. Won't come up. I don't think, Spencer Jones might come up later. Won't make a big impact. Jackson Jobe, I don't think will come up. And Marco Gonzalez is an IL piece. So for Jab, I just don't understand the process. He could flip those prospects for other players, but he's not going to get Juan Soto. I mean, objectively, I don't think he's going to get Juan Soto back. I mean, actually, Braxton could be the person to do something like that, but I don't think he will get Juan Soto back. And I know we were talking about. I mean, we were talking about this in general. I remember we were giving our deliberation on this trade. Who is the best player right now you would give up for James Wood? If you're a contender, you're probably not giving up any of your good guys because, let's say you're me. I have Jose Ramirez, who's a top 5, has the 5th most points among all hitters. Why would I give up, even though James Wood's very young and Jose Ramirez is a decade older? I'm trying to win this year. Why would I give up Jose Ramirez? So what? The best player, I mean, John Hyde, I mean, Marcell Ozuna. Okay, but I mean, I'm just looking kind of these players. I don't know who I necessarily give up. Like, I just don't. You're not going to get. I mean, you're not going to get a top end arm. I'll tell you that. You might get. You might get a better. The bat you could probably swing a bit more, but you can't really count on it. So I'm just a little confused here in terms of the process on Jab's side. And then for Braxton, I mean, I will say this. His hitting is actually not like that bad anymore. Like, he's got players like Ellie De La Cruz, amazing player. Juan Soto, amazing player. Anthony Volpe is just consistent. He's hovering around 6 point. He's a little under 6 point per game, bad 23. That's fine. Novelli Marte, we talked about him. Mason Wynn, I like him. He's been a nice bat. Still not great. He's still not going to really he's not even going to get into the echelon of competing for a back end playoff spot because he really doesn't have a lot to work with. And we've already talked about his pitching kind of at extent. So I don't understand why Braxton did it because if anything, if history has taught us anything, and maybe I could be wrong, I feel like Braxton's going to just reshuffle the deck, trade away Soto for another kind of collection of assets. Maybe he'll get some major league player that's proven, but maybe not on the level of Juan Soto. I just don't know personally. I don't understand the process. It makes a little more from Braxton point of view, and that's why I would say Braxton probably won this trade in the short term because the likelihood any of the guys Jab gets are as good as Juan Soto is very small. And Braxton, who, if you would have told me Juan Soto got traded and Braxton was the one with it, like, I'm not disrespecting Braxton, I'm just looking at the situation of his team, and Braxton was the one who ended up with him, I would have been shocked. I personally was in the running for Soto. It just didn't really line the asking price Jab was asking for really didn't line up with where I saw my team. Maybe this could have been a missed opportunity by me. We'll see. I do that, but I just don't understand the process really from either team. Braxton at least got the best player, so that's why I'll say he won the short term. And when you get the best player, I think it's hard to say you lost a trade. But that's my thoughts on it. If you have anything else to touch on this, I think this was an extensive talk on the Juan Soto situation.
We will report back when James Wood kills it or is moved again, or when Braxton is truly competing.
Yeah, we will definitely see. And at least there's someone on, a top end talent who's not just aggregated between, one of the same, 4 or 5 teams. Braxton actually now has the 6th and 7th ranked bat in all of the league with Juan Soto and Ellie De La Cruz. But that'll do it for the trade section. I know we talked about a trade that happened this week in the window. I thought it was too big of a trade to ignore. Sue me. I don't care. It's our podcast. But I think we're going to head on to the preview for next week. We're going to kind of make this short. I know we've been going on for a little bit. Extensive talk on Juan Soto. I think we'll start with match of the week, which actually, or what I think is matchup of the week. And it's my own matchup. Rocky Mountain Vibes taking on the Clearwater Beach Dogs as of the recording of this episode, Tuesday at 11 p.m. It is currently 186 to 169. Connor, I'll get your thoughts. What do you think of this matchup? And then what do you think of this matchup?
So right now, going into Tuesday, they're essentially Tuesday's games are 90% over. We tout Bry's pitching as terrific, but Hen's currently outscoring him in that department, and Bry's outscoring Hen in hitting. Uh, I believe that Bry has already used 5 starts versus your 3. So for a 17-point deficit, that's not too bad. Going into this week, I would have probably picked Bryce just because I think his team has been on a different tier. There's about a 2-game win-loss difference, but I think your team is in a great spot to come back from this, have some more pitching performances. Miguel Andujar has already had some points. Who are the other big boppers? Jose Ramirez, of course, carrying the load. And Bryce Harper coming back is helpful. So I do think that you're going to pull off a slight upset, but this is going to be close till Sunday.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an exciting matchup. I think going in, I would have predicted my team. I think I'd outscored Bry. No, I didn't outscore him last week because he had the most points last week. But I obviously always have confidence in my team. Although something to keep note of, and it's something I've been keeping track of, with the All-Star break coming up, a lot of these starts seem to get shifted around, or there might be a lot of, especially guys who are on the higher end. Like I know Zach Wheeler had a start today where he got pulled after the 5th inning and he only threw like 70-something pitches. He still ended up with a 28-point start, which is good. But, obviously, with the opportunity that was presenting itself, could have went for some more. So right now, the starting pitcher matchup disparity is 4 starts have been completed for Bry. I've completed 2, and Chris Sale is in the midst of his starts. It would be 3-2 by the end of this game. So, like you said, pitch, very close matchup. Obviously, I think the current projections say 834 to 804 in favor of Bry. I'm gonna go with my team. I feel like I always gotta, you always gotta, if you're not gonna believe itself, then who's gonna believe in you? Although I think Bry will put up one hell of a fight, and this is a game that could really determine some playoff seeding. First time playing Bry, I would have the tiebreaker over him, and then I also only be a game behind, especially if we're heading into the last few weeks. Next matchup I want to talk about is talking about the Juan Soto trade. Jabs, Portland Sea Dogs taking on the Nashville Sounds, currently leading 159 to 101. Looking at some star totals, Tita's on 2 starts finished. He's in the midst of a 3rd, and Jab has 3 starts in the process. I think Jab's going to win. I just think, I'm going to go with the better team here. Tita is keeping it close, and with his wheeling and dealing, you can never really take out of question who he will acquire. Ben Rice is definitely, on a nice pace. He had 3 homers. What was it, yesterday, 2 days ago? Hit another one today. So if he has a big week, I guess I could see something happening. But I'm going to go with Jab's team. I just like the talent more. And, despite my thoughts on the Juan Soto deal, really think his team's been one of the most consistent teams of this entire year.
Yeah, I think Chab's going to win as well. Just, again, another different talent here. Is he going to score 500 offensive points this week? Probably not, but you never know. I don't know. There's too much more to say here. I think Jab's going to get this, and the main thing I'm going to look for is how is Tita performing versus Chad, and right now Chad's ahead by 55 points.
Yep, and I think we could run by the rest of these matchups. Actually, no. I'll touch on this. We can go a little more in depth with this one. and I think we can pretty much run through the rest of these. The Oklahoma City 89ers currently lead the Rocket City Trash Pandas 156 to 103. Very close matchup. Both teams have only used a start. Something I will point out, and this was something actually, excuse me, noticed my last matchup when I played Homco, didn't hit the start minimum, or not minimum, did not hit the start maximum. Currently slated for 10 starts this week. I didn't fully check to see if, maybe, especially I know I've been seeing some issues where guy starts are getting pushed back. There's been a couple of rain delays and, the All-Star break, teams are maybe trying to give their high-end arms another, extra day of rest. So, maybe Homco's lineups haven't been fully set yet. But right now, Homco's only sitting at 9 starts for the week. Meanwhile, Chad has 12. Both teams, I feel like, are in a very similar position, in terms of where their team lies. I know Chad's only a game behind the 7 seed, and Homco doesn't seem to buy a win. But in terms of actual talent, I think these teams are very similar. Obviously, I think I would lean a little more towards Chad, especially in the pitching department. But I think Chad's had some up and down weeks. I think simply just for the fact that Chad's slated for these 12 starts and Homco isn't, I got to give the edge to Chad. Although I could see Homco, especially if he gets those 12 starts, where he can pull off the upset and really put a damper on Chad's playoff ambitions.
I think that's a really awesome point on how these teams seem to be in similar positions. One underperforming compared to the hype coming into the year in Homco, and Chad perhaps a little bit, but still has a great asset pool and has been consistently in the high 500s, low 600s. I do think Chad pulls this off. The incentives are just higher given the potential playoff spot in line, but I think this is going to be one to definitely keep watching over the weekend.
Yeah, and I mean, also something we pointed out when talking about last week's matchups, Tita's got a tough game against Jab, and Chad's got a game against Homco. Homco's not a guarantee. I'm not saying Homco's a guarantee win, but Chad's definitely favored to beat Homco. Tita is not favored to beat Jab. If Chad gets that game back on him, point differential is currently 63 in favor of Tita. Like we said, by the end of the week, that could be 100 points in favor of Chad. So we could see a new 7 seed emerge, just for the short time being, but definitely something to keep track of, especially as the pendulum keeps swinging for that 7 seed. We're going to quickly, we'll talk about this matchup, Connor. If you want to go a bit more in detail into it, I'll let your team shine. You're taking on your Amarillo Sapos, taking on the Norfolk Tides after essentially 2 days of action. It is 173 to 128 in favor of Paul. What do you got for your boys, Connor?
I mean, I beat Paul in, I believe, week 3. So the way that Paul normally handles these upsets is by kicking the team's ass next time. So going into Sunday, I thought I would lose by 200. So far, my team is keeping pace with a great portion of the league, but Paul is currently the number 2 scorer. Number 2 behind Bry and 2 points ahead of you. We've had some negative pitching performances, and Paul just, I think, has more to win here. But so I am going to take Paul, but I'm very happy with the first couple days and do plan to give it my all in hopes of another upset.
Yeah, I hope you do give it your all. Obviously, I think I'd favor Paul in this, but I mean, hey, you did it once. Why not do it again? Although it is hard to beat the same team twice in the same year. Julio Rodriguez with 26 points today alone. So the trade working dividends for Paul early on. Also, Josh Naylor with a 31-point performance. These next couple of matches, I'm going to fly through them pretty quickly. I feel like, no offense to these owners, I feel like not a whole lot can be said. If you want to talk specifically on any one of these games, we can dive into it. John Height taking on Scott currently leads 142 to 110. John Height probably going to take this matchup. Scott's only slated for 7 starts. Even if he was slated for all 12, I take John Height pretty easily. Looking on the side of Bowling Green, Hot Rods, and El Paso Chihuahuas, Cody currently leads 163 to 36. Interesting note, Cody is not hitting the star maximum this week. Talked about his injuries in the pitching department. See if he, gets some arms to replenish that. And then Dave's Rochester Red Wings taking on the Bismarck Larks, 125 to 68 right now. Logan O'Hoppe with 29 points in one day alone. And I'd say Dave would win that matchup pretty easily, adding to his pace. You got anything to add to any of these matchups? I feel like, if there's an upset, we'll talk about it next week. But I feel like all these matchups seem pretty cut and dry on who the winner will be.
Height's going to win. Shout out Dave. Brackton, please get a timeline or formal plan for the team if there isn't one already. I think that pretty much covers it.
Something to note, actually. I was looking at the standings before we sign off. So if all the matchups go the way we think, obviously that doesn't always happen, but let's say it does. So if Smell loses, if you lose, if Scott loses, and Dave wins, they will all be 5-10. Dave will jump up to the 9 seed, 2 games, or presumably if Chad wins, 2 games out of the 7 seed. So Dave is lurking really behind on that. Could really make a big jump this week if the cards play right in his favor. Actually, Scott will be 4-11, not 5-10. Excuse me. So the 3-way tie for 5-10. Dave would take the tiebreaker unless you or Smell beat him, and I forget about this. That could have happened. I would have to look at Dave's schedules, but still, 5-10 for Dave. 2 games out of the 7 seed, and a crowd bunched up there on the outside looking in. But Connor, you got anything else to add, or are you ready to wrap this up?
Yeah, nothing really. I think the one news that just broke is that Wander Franco was formally charged for sexually exploiting a minor. So it seems like his career is done. But in terms of the league, I think the parity's still awesome, and it should be another fun round of matchups right now.
Yeah, what a crazy time. Not crazy time. Obviously, what it was an awful situation that happened with Wander Franco, but it's also kind of crazy just looking back. The change from less than a year could really cause, but looks like he is done in the major leagues forever, which is good because anyone who does that stuff is a bad person and should not be playing baseball. But I think that will do it for us here on the Based on Balls podcast, week 14, or week as we now head into week 15. One more week before the All-Star break. Only 5 more regular season weeks until the playoffs. Definitely getting to the thick of it. For Connor, myself, Hen, we'll be back next week with some Based on Balls podcasts. Take care.